making this program in response to a short piece of video which was posted on social media recently. And this piece of video, let me just reset the camera a little bit. This piece of video came from Mr Salmond's own television show. It was co-hosted by his, I think, second in command, I think you would have to say, Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh. And she was actually interviewing Mr Salmond about his opinions on how we go about gaining self-determination. And one of the things she asked him about was the importance of obtaining international recognition and international, shall we say, legal, not permission, but acceptance that the Scots have the right to self-determination before having some kind of democratic event like a referendum or an election in order to process that, in order to give people a chance to vote. Now, what Mr Salmond said next, I think we have to take in context. It's important to remember that Alex Salmond fought for decades inside the United Kingdom system, political system of Westminster, as an MP, before he came to prominence in 2011 and before the well-known referendum we had in 2014. Now, at that time, Mr Salmond was working inside the UK system and had made an amazing job of finessing the UK government into allowing a referendum to take place, but even better than that, also agreeing through this Edinburgh Agreement, which he drafted and got David Cameron to sign, that the United Kingdom would respect the result, and that if there were a yes vote, that it would result in independence. This was an amazing thing for anybody to achieve, and I think everybody recognises that. But in the context of this interview, Mr Salmond said that he felt that going to, for example, the United Nations or the international courts, seeking to clarify the legal right of Scots to hold a referendum again on the issue of the Constitution and of ending the Union was a part of the solution. But in his mind, he felt that we needed to get a mandate first. Now, that would require a general election victory, which would produce an actual majority, an outright majority in the Holyrood in favour of holding a referendum and then asking the international community for the legal ruling on our right to do so. Now, it was pointed out after this clip went live by Sarah Salyers of Salvo that in this particular instance, Mr Salmond's assessment of the way this should work was in fact the wrong way around. And it was based on his previous experience working from within the UK system prior to 2014, when the only way that he could see at the time of obtaining an independence referendum was to go the way he actually went, which was talking the United Kingdom into doing it in the first place, and also managing to convince them to sign an agreement which would have actually actioned the result of that referendum. However, times had changed so much by the time this interview was aired. In fact, yesterday when I saw this for the first time in a long time, actually, I'd seen the original interview many months ago, I realized that this was being played so that people would get the idea that the only way we could have another referendum is if we had the mandate first. Now, we know that the mandates for an independence referendum have been gained before by the SNP, but not used. And the other thing that Sarah Salyers pointed out, and I think this is very important to remember in the current context, not in the world that Mr Salmond inhabited back before 2011, but in the current context, the United Kingdom is never going to give any kind of permission for another referendum, no matter what mandates we manage to achieve. And therefore, it is actually more important for us to get the international ruling on our right to self-determination first this time, because doing it after a mandate has been gained will actually just end up in us stalling on the buffers, as the United Kingdom basically refuses to accept that we have any such right. And being a member of the Security Council of the UN, they have a tremendous amount of veto power in the UN and could actually just prevent the United Nations from giving any such ruling. So I think Sarah is right in this instance that Mr Salmond's comments, taken at the time they were given, um, led to him saying what he said. Now, he was basically, he was basing his assessment of the importance of a self-determination ruling by the UN or by the International Courts of Justice as a part of what was necessary. But in his mind, obtaining the voter mandate first was essential. Now, in the past, that would have been true, but now we know that that mandate, even if we get it, and that's a big if, but if we did get it, would be stymied by the United Kingdom at the UN. So it's much more important to go to international arbiters now to establish that we have the right to hold a referendum, and that way, when we do get a big mandate at Holyrood, for example, and we have, we hope, a large enough majority to actually legislate for a referendum, we have that international backing before we start and before the United Kingdom can put up any roadblocks to it. So for those of you thinking that Mr Salmond was right, I would say yes, he was, but only prior to 2014. In the intervening 10 years since the referendum, things have changed so much that the SNP has now effectively been neutered by the United Kingdom. Which brings me to my last point today. People have been asking why it was not only that the United Kingdom snubbed the duty, I think, to bring home a former First Minister's remains for burial, at the expense of the taxpayer, to be fair. It was commonplace, and still is commonplace, for British leaders who die abroad, who, you know, who in the sort of duties that they perform as Prime Minister or whatever, for their remains to be brought back by Royal Air Force aircraft for repatriation. That wasn't done, but to be honest with you, I never expected the United Kingdom to do so, and I'll explain why in a moment. But what was more puzzling was the reaction of the Scottish Government to this. Why was it John Swinney's administration didn't step in to charter a plane and bring home one of, if not the most famous peacetime leader Scotland has ever had, for repatriation of his body back to his family for a funeral? Now, I think the reason behind that is political. I don't think the Swinney administration was able to do that because they have basically accepted devolution. They've accepted the defeat of 2014 and have decided to live within the United Kingdom from now on. And that means that they cannot go against the UK government, or will not go against the UK government's wishes. It's also been argued, and I made a post yesterday in which I said that it was the people of Scotland who really brought Alex Salmond home. Somebody said, oh, it was Tom Hunter who paid for the plane. Yeah, of course it was Tom Hunter who paid for the plane. Tom Hunter was a friend of Alex Salmond's, a political opponent who opposed his views, but respected the man enough to charter a plane to bring his body back for his family, to bury him properly. That's not in question. What I was referring to was the people of Scotland who welcomed his remains back. We're talking about several dozen indie bikers who escorted the cortege back to his hometown. And for the people who lined the streets, and his family and friends who welcomed his remains back to his hometown. That was what I was referring to. It was the small people. This is very much in keeping with the William Wallace analogy, where Salmond, like Wallace, was a man who brought ordinary people out on the streets. He had the common touch. He was able to relate to ordinary people, and he could. He didn't condescend, he didn't talk down to them. He wasn't aloof. And that was one of his most amazing qualities as a politician. But why was he snubbed? Why was he snubbed by his own former party, the SNP? And I think, as I said, the answer to that is the SNP is now firmly in the devolutionist pocket, if you like, and they will not go against the United Kingdom government. Far from it, in fact. We saw the, I think it's the, I'm not sure if she's the temporary or the stand-in energy minister for the SNP government, doing a deal with Ed Miliband on free ports and this new GB Energy paper tiger, which Miliband's party is setting up. presumably just to get more of Scotland's energy and pipe it down to England and make a tiny profit for whoever GB Energy is. And it seems to be a private corporation, although supposedly publicly owned. So where that tiny bit of money will go, I have no idea. But the fact is that the SNP is now actively cooperating with the Labour government, which they have to do because they are effectively, all of the MSPs in Holyrood are paid by the British state, because it's a British state sub-government of the United Kingdom, which administrates this northern region of the UK. So they're not in a position to do anything about it. If somebody wants to keep his job, he has to toe the line. However, it's also the reason why he's been snubbed is effectively to say to the people of Scotland, we have brought all your leaders low. Look at what's happened to your former hero. He can't even get a flight home. Nobody will pay for his flight back to your pathetic little country. And laughing at us as we all wrung our hands and wept for essentially one of the greatest politicians of the modern era. So this was basically a deliberate snub by the UK, bringing along the SNP government in the process, making them look weak, and basically saying to the people of Scotland, not even your own government can bring this man home. In fact, it was a unionist businessman who paid for the flight. Just look at how weak and pathetic Scotland is, that they couldn't even bring this man back. Now, it's no surprise as a result of this humiliation, and this was a deliberate humiliation by the United Kingdom. This is a political act to make us feel bad and to make us feel weak so that we will not continue the fight for independence. But remember, his family definitely, I don't think, want any of the people who were responsible for trashing Mr Salmond's reputation, both as a man and as a politician, and those who were responsible for the perjury and the spurious charges brought against him, which he was acquitted of, incidentally, and was found innocent of in all cases. They wouldn't want people involved in that to be at his funeral. And it's no surprise. Why would you want somebody who treated the man that way in life to be at his funeral? So the stories about who is going to be at the funeral and who is not do not surprise me, but it's up to the family to decide. It's not up to me, it's not up to politicians, it's not even up to the independence movement to decide who attends that funeral. This is his wife and family's grieving period, and they need to be respected. If they don't want those people at the funeral, so be it. It doesn't surprise me in the slightest. After the insults and the snubs and the humiliation inflicted upon not just Mr Salmond and his family, but the entire country as a result of what has happened. The idea behind all of this is a massive political crushing blow to stamp out all hope of any independence in the future. However, what Mr Salmond said, and what I was referring to at the beginning of this programme, is that we need to get the international community on side before we act, before we elect a government which will action an independence vote for all of us, because it's never going to be given. It's always going to be withheld now. The United Kingdom had a very close shave in 2014. They almost lost their cash cow. They're never going to allow that to happen again. So there will be no Section 30 orders granted, there'll be no permissions given, and they will veto every single attempt that Scotland makes. If it does get a majority of pro-independence MSPs elected, they will veto any attempt to go to the United Nations and look for a ruling on self-determination so we can hold a referendum. We need to get that done first, and that's what Salvo is there for and what it's doing at the moment. Once that is done, all we have to do is elect a majority government in Holyrood, which then legislates to hold the referendum and everybody gets a vote on it. We're not even saying at this stage, incidentally, when I'm talking about a referendum, we're not talking about just declaring independence. We're talking about asking the people if they want independence in a democratic event, which is what democracies are for and what democracy is. Democracy is not a one-time shot. You don't only get one shot at being independent. You don't get one shot at deciding whether you want it or not. Democracy is about being allowed to change your mind and being allowed to vote again on something which you perhaps were dissuaded from the previous time. Otherwise, governments would never change. Anyway, that is all I wanted to say today. That Mr Salmond's comments about getting a mandate before going for a ruling on self-determination internationally were made, I think, based on his previous experience of working within the UK system. And perhaps, I'm not sure when that interview was actually filmed, but I suspect it was before a lot of events took place. However, things have changed dramatically since then, and I think because of that, the situation is now reversed. So we need to get the international, not permission, the international ruling on our right to self-determination as a people first, and then vote MSPs into Holyrood who will take the action required to hold the referendum with the backing already secured. United Kingdom unable to jump in there and try to veto it at the last moment. It'll be interesting to see how things pan out in the near future with Salvo's efforts to make these arguments to the International Court of Justice, perhaps the UN as well later on. But I would anticipate in the current situation, where the UK is still persona non grata in the European Union, and where the UK is perceived globally and correctly as a very weakened, economically weakened state, which is thrashing around trying to rope in people like the United States to their aid, would struggle in the UN against this type of activity because they've got too many other things to deal with at the moment that are more pressing. And the Labour Party probably at the moment is still going to be struggling to try to do the things that they promised they would do but haven't done. And also they're so unpopular with people at the moment because of the cuts that they have made, which are Tory cuts, that it's going to be very difficult for them to keep their eye on the ball internationally while all this is going on. Anyway, that is my message for you today. I'm deeply saddened by the loss of Mr Salmond, and I know everybody says their thoughts and prayers are with his family, and that is such a hackneyed term, but losing somebody very close to you like that is an enormous blow to your psychological being. It just hurts so much, and I can understand that. So that's all I'm going to say about the matter just now, but I just wanted to clarify what Mr Salmond was talking about in that interview, and how in the modern context it now needs to be swapped around because the United Kingdom is not going to do what they did back in 2011. No way. So we are where we are, and we have a 2026 general election at Holyrood to plan ahead for. In the meantime, Salvo is doing the heavy lifting on the background legal ruling on our right to self-determination so that we can elect a government which will hold a vote on independence. It's not going to declare independence. That would not be lawful, and the international community would view that askance. But they wouldn't view it askance if we vote about it. And they will, I'm sure, allow us to do that once they hear the case being put by Salvo. I'll see you soon. Keep the faith. Bye for now.